Hi guys, my name is Katie Moreno and I am the founder of OrganizedAdvisor.com. And today I'm going to be going through the yearbook roadmap with you, which is basically just a really big checklist of a bunch of things that you will do throughout your year in order to produce your yearbook. Unfortunately, this isn't a comprehensive list because every single yearbook and every single program and setup and staff structure and deadlines are different. And so it's not necessarily going to be like a comprehensive list. There's probably things on here that you do, and there's probably things on here that you don't do. And so you can just ignore those. But it's meant to be a starting place so that way you can make sure that you're accomplishing those definite things that you need in order to get your yearbook published. Also, if this is your first year, this is again a great starting place. But remember that the goal is just to get the yearbook done. Just survive the year, get the yearbook done, make notes for next year so that way you can make changes along the way. But don't stress too much about being perfect or about being award winning or any of that. Like just get the yearbook done, learn the process, and then you can always improve on it later. Every advisor that you ask, if you look back at their first yearbook, they'll be like, "Oh, please don't show it to me. Like it's a mess," and that's just because you're learning what you're doing. And so this is going to get you through that year and make sure that first year you get the yearbook done and that you get it produced and then you survived, and then we can talk about next year again later on. So to get started, I like alliteration a lot, and so I have this process broken down into a bunch of terms that start with P. So the first is going to be prepare. You're going to start to prepare for your year and get everything you need in line before the kids even come. Then you're going to plan. This is planning your actual publication. Then you're going to promote it. You're going to produce it, proof it, present it to the student body and the community, and then you get to party. And so the first step is prepare. If you are a spring delivery, you can actually start this process all as early as April of the preceding school year because your final deadline for the book before that is like in March. And so you can actually start by preparing for the next school year before the current school year even ends. But obviously it's summertime right now. You're probably already past that unless you're a fall delivery. But you want to start building your staff if you haven't already, or if you're brand new to this, or you just got hired last week. You want to make sure that you have a solid staff. So you want to, if you need to recruit, you can do that through your English classes or your counselors. You can, if you're doing it ahead of time, have your current staff speak to the younger classes, like the freshmen. You can also visit the feeder schools, like the junior highs or middle schools that lead into your school. They have a yearbook staff as well. You could talk to those kids, as well as the advanced English classes, stuff like that. Those are the kids that you'd want to target for joining the publication staff. Then you also want to decide on your editors and your leadership. You want to maybe hold applications, hold interviews, and decide on who those leaders are for the next year. Then you, as the advisor, want to sharpen your skills. So you're doing a great job of doing that already. You will need to attend a workshop or a camp, and that gives you the opportunity to get additional training in areas that you might need improvement. A lot of times advisors come from the English background, or they come from an art background, or math or science or history or whatever, and they might be lacking skills in one of those areas. Like if you're an English teacher, you might not know photography or the design side of things. And so you can find trainings out there that will help you with that. And this gives you an opportunity to get your professional development taken care of, but also have it be super applicable to the skills that you're teaching your kids. Then you want to take this time to, when things aren't really crazy and busy, you want to get organized. So you're researching different systems for photo organization. Even if you're an experienced advisor, there's always room for improvement. There's other ideas out there. You can check in Facebook groups and the JEA listserv, and there's just a ton of stuff out there, resources that you can talk to other advisors and see what works for them. Any system that you have that maybe isn't working, take this time to evaluate like what's not working about it, what can I improve for next year, and make those changes and decide what works best for your staff. Also take this opportunity to do some spring cleaning. Get stuff out of your room that you don't need anymore. Get rid of old sample books that you're not using anymore that aren't really relevant, and clean out your room and organize it so you can start fresh for the next school year. Oh, let me make myself a little smaller. Then obviously you want to meet your rep. If you're a brand new advisor, obviously meeting your rep is probably going to come before any of these things. But this is where you're going to set your deadlines. You're going to set your budget. You're going to set the price of the book and the tiers. Like when does it increase? You'll set some sales goals. And this is also your opportunity to ask any questions you may have. And granted, if you're brand new, you might not have questions yet. You might not even know what you don't know. But if you do, this is your opportunity. But you can also ask them what their preferences are about communication. Do they prefer you to text them, call them, email them, send a carrier pigeon, like whatever it might be. You're probably going to have more questions in the future. And so finding out what way works best for them and what, get you the fastest answer is probably going to be really helpful to you to get those questions answered in the future. All right, and then further preparing, you need to think about the first week of school. This does need to happen in the summer because if you wait until you go back in service, it's likely too late already. And so you need to do things like create your staff manual. If you go on organizedadvisor.com and type staff manual into the search box, there's an article that has a bunch of downloads that you can use as examples. You also need to think about some team building activities. That first week is really crucial in making sure that your staff starts to bond, especially if you have an experienced staff and you have editors that were on staff last year. They probably already know each other and they already feel comfortable in your classroom, and those newbies need to be brought into the fold. And so making sure you have dedicated time for team building is super important, and it'll show through in your publication. Then you want to take some headshots for the press passes and make their press passes during that first week of school. Then we want to start thinking about how we're going to get that staff to bond together. And so obviously you'll do some in-classroom team building, but also look for other ways throughout the whole school year to create an environment that celebrates your staff being like a family. And so one way to do that is through a brag board. It's like an extra bulletin board you have in your classroom or like a space, and you can celebrate even the smallest things, like getting an A on their math test and they were struggling and they've been going to tutoring, or they finally got their spread done and they've been the class slacker all along. Like, give them a space to brag on each other and for you to brag on them as well. You can also recruit their parents, like during deadline when things are stressy. You can send an email to their parents and say, hey, we're trying to fill up our brag board, like leave us a note, or anonymously. You can also have the faculty send notes as well, especially during deadlines. That can be really sweet. Then also create a collaborative staff playlist that's super easy on Spotify. Everyone submits a couple of songs for late work nights. That's really fun, and you can start to do little sing-alongs and stuff. We ended up making our staff song Bohemian Rhapsody, and we would all scream it at the top of our lungs, and it was so fun. I really am a fan of hosting monthly birthday parties. I had some months where I didn't have a student's birthday, but we celebrated anyway, just because someone in the world has a birthday that month. And it was really just an opportunity to take a brain break and celebrate and eat some cake and then go back to work. Also, everyone already does this, but you want to design and order t-shirts as early as possible because you want to have them already feel like they're part of a group, they're part of a community, and getting that shirt and wearing that shirt, and especially when you wear it all together, take some staff pictures, is just a really easy way to start building that staff bond. And then this one I really like, and I hesitate to use the word theme because theme is already such a yearbooky term, but I always like to do a classroom theme. So you'll see this a lot in elementary school, but I always think that luau or Hawaiian theme is one of the easiest ones, but you decorate your classroom based on this theme. It doesn't have to relate to your yearbook theme at all, but it's just a good way to kind of make your classroom an inviting atmosphere so those kids feel like that's their home on campus. So even when they're not in class, they might be hanging out in your classroom, and that will also create that family bond because it feels like home. So I always like luau because you can do a grass skirt around your desk. You can decorate your bulletin boards with really bright colors. You can give students the Hawaiian leis on the first day of school. It's pretty affordable, and it's really fun to just make your classroom exciting. And then you want to set your staff schedule. So you're going to set your late work nights depending on when your deadlines are. Set your staff meetings. You might have a staff meeting every Monday in class, or maybe you have all staff meetings with all your publications once a month. Whatever it is, just put those on a calendar so your staff can plan around them. The earlier you can get those dates, the more likely you're to have everybody attend. And then also plan the trips for the year. If you're going to go to any of the conventions or the workshops, go ahead and plan those out, put those on the calendar. If you can, give them a budget of how much those trips are going to cost, so that way they can plan ahead. All right, so then you've prepared for your year. Now it's time to plan your publication. So this is where you start to set up your sales. So you're going to set up your online store. You're probably going to do this with your rep or with your account executive. You're going to ask about sales opportunities at the beginning of the year, before school, if there's a event where students get their schedule and they get their textbooks, like set up a table there, sell some yearbooks. Back to school events like open house, there's another good opportunity, or like sporting events like a scrimmage, even before school starts, those happen. And you can always set up a table there as long as you ask ahead of time and are intentional about it. Then you want to set your dates for your pricing tiers and then your mailings sent home as well. You want to plan those out so you're not caught off guard and your marketing aligns with those price increases. Then you need to talk to your school portrait photography company. Sometimes that's the same company, but sometimes it's two different ones that do your underclassmen and do your seniors. But you want to schedule a portrait day on campus and then a retake day. Then you want to also review your senior portrait procedures because typically the senior portrait company sends out all the marketing and schedules all the sessions and then they just send you the photos. But if you are responsible for any of those things, like marketing, for instance, you need to be aware of that. And so you want to review that with the company. You want to confirm the deadlines from the portrait companies for the delivery. So sometimes, they want to get as many seniors as they can in the book, so they'll push their deadline to the very last second, but you need to make sure that that aligns with your print deadline. Typically, you want to put your portraits as early as you can because that knocks out a lot of pages and it gives you time to work on the other ones. But sometimes, just depending on what your content is, that doesn't always line up like that, but you just want to make sure that you have your pictures in time to get them ready for the deadline, the print deadline. And then you also want to review a procedure for using a preferred name. This is something that's really come up in the past couple of years that a lot of students feel very strongly about. And previously, most schools would just go by what your legal name is in the school record. But now, a lot of students go by a different name than that. And so in the yearbook, it is a historical document. So you do want to make sure that their legal name is maybe on their portrait, but sometimes schools will or districts will allow them to go by a preferred name if it's different than their legal name. Sometimes districts allow them to change it, but it has to be on the actual record with the school. Whatever your procedure is, think about that ahead of time before there's an issue and publish that policy somewhere. Put it on your website, put it out in an email, have it somewhere that can be referred to because you don't want to be in a situation where you're trying to scramble and figure out your policy when it's being asked of you. And then technology-wise, you want to, and you might need to work with your tech people in your district, but you want to install all the latest software or the plugin updates on all your computers to make sure your InDesign is up to date, make sure all your drivers are up to date and everything is good to go for your software to design your book, but also your printers and all those other accessories and card readers and everything. You also want to take a equipment inventory at this time and make sure that you have all your cameras, you have all your lenses, you know where they are, clean them, and then also notice if there's anything that you need to send out for repair. Sometimes it's not worth the money to send it out for repair. It's just worth it to buy a new camera. But if you're on a limited budget or it's all you got, if there's something that you can repair, especially if you send it to a local shop versus sending it to the manufacturer, sometimes that can be cheaper. And then you start to work on your book. And so you're going to decide on your theme with your staff. Oh, too far. You're going to build, and then once you decide on your theme, you're going to build a style guide. And that's going to have all your fonts and your colors and your sizes and your color or portrait treatments and your photo treatments and examples of these. Anything that you can show to your staff instead of tell your staff. Like if you tell them that all the photos are going to be in, all the dominant photos are going to be in black and white, that's great. But it would be even better if you built a sample layout and put that photo in black and white to show them how that's going to correlate to the theme and the overall design aesthetic of the book. So anytime you can show something versus tell it, do it. Then you're going to book your cover design appointment or design your cover, and then you're going to build your layout templates that you'll use later on in the book. Then for your photos, you're going, and this is planning your student photography assignments. So you're going to plan out an annual calendar. So you're going to look at the school calendar, you're going to look at the event schedule, you're going to look at the sports schedules and the seasons, you're going to look at fine arts and all the organizations and all the clubs, and you're going to build a really big calendar of all the events that you can think of. So traditional things like homecoming, prom, all of those dates are already set typically. If not, it's like the time of year is set. So prom is typically April or May. Homecoming is typically September or October. And so you want to put all of those things on a giant master list. And so that way you make sure you don't miss them when they happen. Also, all the fine arts, like the orchestra performance and the fall play and the spring play and the musical, all of those. And the same thing with the sports schedules. And then you want to use that to create an event sign up. On your annual planning calendar, it's probably going to be more generic and or like general, like the entire football season goes from August to December. Maybe if you go all the way to state, and then on your event sign up, you have it by game. So every team, every game is on the calendar. A lot of people use Google Calendar for this, and I think that that works really well because you can put so much detail into it. So on the event sign up, you can put the location, you can put in the description who signed up for the event. There's a lot of details there, which is really, really helpful. Um, but getting all that into Google Calendar could sometimes be a challenge, but if you have all your staff working on it together, then it goes pretty fast. Then you also want to create, if you don't already have one, an equipment checkout system, whether that's just a piece of paper with the cameras numbered, or you have cards that you place into the bucket with your face on it to prove that, or to say that I have this camera, whatever it is. You want to make sure you have an equipment checkout system that's really easy for the staff to follow. It's quick, and it's also like it's also flexible. So like if something goes wrong, you can still track down what happens, where things are. And then you want to create photo folders on a shared drive. And so you want to go ahead and into your shared drive, typically on Google Drive or something similar, you create all your folders for where your photos are going to be uploaded. So once student photographers get back, they can upload their photos into the shared drive. So that way, whenever whoever's doing that page can go and look through the photos and decide which photos they're going to actually use. Then you start to brainstorm your coverage. And so you're looking at your theme and you're coming up with different page topics. You might decide on some showstopper spreads that are usually related to the theme. You want to complete your page ladder at this point. And obviously things are flexible. Like if your football team goes to state or if they win state, obviously you're going to need to adjust coverage a little bit. So you want to complete it as most you can, but it's not the end of the world if there's some holes or some blanks. And then you want to assign spreads to the deadlines by signature. So as much as you possibly can, try to put your sections and your content into deadlines that you can complete signatures at a time. So for instance, don't put football right next to baseball because those are two different timelines throughout the year. And so you want your football and your volleyball and your fall sports to be together so you can hopefully fill up a whole signature of those sports. And then you want like baseball, softball, soccer to go together because those are spring sports and those will be at the same time of the year so you can submit that signature together. There is an art form, I think, to planning your ladder because sometimes it just doesn't perfectly fit together by signature, but insofar as you can control it, try to complete your pages by signatures together. Then I always like to color code my pages by deadlines. So I have a big ladder printed out in the room on a bulletin board that is color coded, but I also have a Google Drive version on a Google Sheet that has it all color coded and then who's assigned each spread, some notes, a lot of different stuff. That ladder kind of is a living document that we use all year long. And then you want to start to assign pages to your staff. So this can be done in a lot of different ways. Usually it's done with some sort of like a hierarchy. Whoever's been on staff longest, who's an editor, they get first pick. The newbies kind of get the whatever's left over. And as they get older and they become editors, then they get first pick. But typically you want to honor the time on staff with the first pick because there's always popular pages and less popular pages. Then you need to work on software. So you need to train your staff on the software, especially if they're new or if it's new to you guys, and then have them practice. Like there is definitely time to practice in the software and use it to create like an all about me spread or create some modules, design some sample layouts, design your templates, get them working in the software as soon as they possibly can, because there is a little bit of a learning curve with that and it takes time and you don't want to have to be worrying about how to do something when you're actually trying to do it. You should have that already trained ahead of time in as much as you can. Then you want to create what I call a yearbook hub, and that's used to track all kinds of things. So this is like one Google Sheet where you have all this information that the staff refers to. Google Sheets are awesome because they're collaborative, so everyone can view it at the same time, but you're tracking things like coverage. So who is on what page? How many times have kids been used? At the beginning of the year, you can download a student list, throw that into the Google Sheet, and then every time you put a kid on a page, have your staff go back and add a page number to that kid's name. If they've already been used 3 times, they're blacklisted. They're not able to be used anymore. And then you can also start tracking people who purchase. So every week you download a new list of people who purchased, and then you mark those off, maybe highlight them on that overall student list. And if they have bought a book but they're not in it at all, go put them in the book somewhere. Make sure if they purchased a book that it's in there, that they're in the book. Also, faculty contacts and department leaders, fine arts directors, club organization sponsors, like every person that you might need to contact in the beginning of the year, get that list of clubs, get that list of department chairs, and put that in there so your staff knows who to contact. And put their emails, and if you have their phone number, like their classroom phone number, put that in there too, because you want to give your students as much information as you can so they can be resourceful and find it on their own without having to contact you to be like, hey, can you email Miss Smith about this thing? No, you need to do it yourself. And if you give them the tools, then they are able to do it without having to come to you for everything. Also, the club leaders, which are typically students, as well as their meeting times and locations. So, do they meet every Tuesday in room 101? You're going to put that in the Yearbook Hub on a tab as well. And then this is just an idea to kind of help you make sure that you're getting enough coverage for each topic. I like to take that list of all the contacts and assign a staff member to each group. So each staff member is going to have a couple of things that they're responsible for. But say I'm Katie and I am a new staff member, but my clubs are JV volleyball, the science department, and the volunteering club. Those are things that I'm going to make sure I build a relationship with those club sponsors and those student leaders, because I want them to know that they have a person on the yearbook staff who's looking out for them and making sure that we get their coverage. So that person, even if they don't actually do the science page, they're just the staff member that's responsible for making sure that the science page has adequate coverage and that the science department chair and the teachers know who to contact to make sure that they get a photographer at their science experiment and their science fair. And so it just lets you put more responsibility onto your students, because the inclination for other teachers is when they have something, they're going to come to you as the advisor, which is fine. We want them to do that. But it's even more impressive too to have a student reach out to you at the beginning of the year and say, hey, my name is Katie, I'm on the yearbook staff, and I'm just wanted to let you know that I'll be the one making sure that the science department is covered accurately. And so I just wanted to talk to you about your schedule, and if you know of any upcoming experiments or events or activities that we could take pictures of, please let me know. And then you've already made that contact. They probably don't have any of that information right now, but that's okay. And then you follow up in a month or so, couple weeks, and you say, hey, just to let you know, I'm reaching out again. You go in person, and maybe you bring them candy or like a pencil or something, like a little gift, and you want to make sure that your presence is known to them. So that way, when something does happen, you're already top of mind and they'll contact you to get the coverage in there. Otherwise, sometimes you're like begging and pleading for coaches to send you a sports score or a roster or even the group photo. And it's because you're not top of mind. They're so busy in their own world coaching. And so you want to intentionally seek them out and make sure that they know when this kid from Yearbook staff comes, they're going to be looking for information. And it's not a negative experience because you've already taken time to build that relationship. Then you want to build another hub for reference. And so on that same shared drive, you're going to put things like your faculty master schedule for like what class periods teachers are maybe available for an interview. Student schedules, if you're allowed to. There is some privacy issues with that, but if you can, you want to have your staff be able to look up student schedules, and also have a policy with that they are not to share it, they're not to abuse it. It's only for journalistic purposes. And then also a privacy list. Typically districts or schools have a list of students that are not allowed to be featured in the yearbook. Their parents on the first day of school or during registration, they check off, no, I don't want my student published. And it usually is like yearbook, online media, social media, blah, blah, blah. And so you want to make sure you have a list of that so your students don't use those kids in the book. You can also mark that on the main student list, but you want to make sure you have that to reference, and you also want to keep it updated. So I always get one at the beginning of the year, and then I get one in like October, and then December, January, and then in March right before the end of the year. But you definitely want to make sure that if you have students on the privacy list, that they are not in the yearbook, because that's actually a legal implication with their privacy. Then you want to start working on senior tributes and start to plan those out. So you want to set the deadlines for those. The earlier, the better. You want to get those senior parents moving. They have to gather their photos. They have to get their senior pictures taken. They might not know what college they're going to, so they don't know what shirt to wear. That's okay, but we want to encourage them to get their information in as soon as possible. You also want to set some requirements, like how many photos, or more so limits. How many photos can you have on each size ad? And then characters also. Sometimes parents will, even though they buy a full page ad, they submit like a novel of information, and ain't nobody got time for that. You also can't put 57 pictures on there. They're going to be so small. So you want to set some limits and some expectations for parents because they don't know what they're doing, and you guys are the experts. And then you also want to create a procedure to gather content. Some publishers have a procedure for this. Sometimes it's just a Dropbox or a Google Drive or an email address. There's lots of different ways to do it, but you want to make sure you think through that procedure and think through the easiest way for your staff to get the content. All right, so now you've planned all the things. I know I feel like I've already talked for so long, but now you're going to also start to promote it. So notice we haven't even started on the yearbook. We're just in the planning and promotion phase. So before school starts, you want to think about all the different ways that you can promote as back to school has the parents' attention. So there's a lot of things that are in the parents' face already that you can leverage and capitalize on in order to remind them, hey, also don't forget while you're doing this and this and this and this, buy your yearbook. I typically see schools sell most of their yearbooks in the before school or back to school season. And so if you do it intentionally, it can really be lucrative for you. And then you can kind of back off a little bit because you pushed it so heavy in the beginning of the year, and then you can hit it heavier when you're about to submit your final count. So a couple of different things you can do to promote at the beginning of the year. Registration days. Typically, a couple weeks before school starts, districts or schools will have dedicated days to registration. If you can set up a flyer or a table or put out yard signs or be there in person to sell yearbooks, you will typically get the attention of those parents. Obviously, there's probably a packet that goes home on the first day of school. A lot of schools have gone to digital these days, but even if it's digital, if you can submit and include your flyer for the yearbook sales in there, then that's great. That's going home to every student, and every parent is expecting it on the first day. If there's some sort of back to school event, like an open house or like a day where they come and get their schedule and their textbooks and their required reading books and stuff like that, that's a good opportunity to set up a table or have at least a banner or a flyer out there to remind parents to buy that yearbook. Yard signs in front of the school, eventually they kind of become part of the landscape, and so they're not as attention getting. So you want to put them up and then take them down and then put them up again a couple months later or weeks later. And you don't want them to be up all the time because they just, again, they blend into the landscape. You want them to be attention getting, and they're not going to be if they're just always up there. Your school probably has a digital marquee or a sign where you can advertise something there. So if you can get into the rotation there, that's a really good place. And then also at your stadium. So at your sporting events, if you have a digital stadium marquee, you can also put an ad on there. And sometimes that's at the district level, and your advisors in your district can work together to get that accomplished. Then you want to do some digital marketing, and you want to plan this out. And so you're going to maybe do some email marketing. Through your publisher, you can probably upload a student list, and then they can send out the e-marketing for you. It's super, super easy. But you might want to also take it into your own hands and do some social media marketing. Typically, when I see schools that really lean into the social media marketing, they can really see some success from and sell a lot more yearbooks. But it isn't just a avenue to push yearbook sales. You have to really give your audience value in order to give them a reason to follow you, and then you weave in the yearbook sales. And so things like the bell schedule, it's different because it's early dismissal, or there's a weather delay for the softball game because it's getting rained out, or there's some sort of announcement like the homecoming court is announced. Push those things out to your social media to establish yourself as like the news source for the school, and then people will want to follow you because if there's a 2-hour delay because there's really bad rain in the morning and school is delayed, they're going to want to know that. Or if it's early dismissal and they need their bell schedule, they're going to want to know that, and so they'll come to you for that information. And then while they're there, they'll also see, hey, buy your yearbook. Also, as a teacher, you can encourage not only your email signature can say like, hey, also buy a yearbook, but also anyone else that, you can offer to design email signatures for them. And then it also has a link to buy a yearbook. The school website obviously should have information about how to buy a yearbook, and then also teacher websites, as well as like class websites, like class of 2023. Those should also have links to buy your yearbook as well. Then there's always the traditional print methods. There are mailers sent home to promote that to your students. Also, like generally like flyers above water fountains in the bathrooms or busy areas, bulletin boards, all that sort of stuff that we've been doing for decades and decades. Posters, door decorations, contests, that sort of thing. And then you need to also promote your senior tributes. I don't like calling them senior ads so much because you're not really advertising your senior. It's really a tribute to them. So sometimes I call it an ad still, but it's basically a tribute. But you want to advertise those in senior classes like English 4 or AP English. Also, if there's like a senior night, and then also you can talk to your administration about offering like a package that includes your yearbook, it includes an ad, it includes a cap and gown, it includes a prom ticket, it includes maybe a senior t-shirt, and that sort of thing kind of packages it all at once. And so even someone that maybe they wouldn't have bought a yearbook, they do because it's just easier to buy the whole package. That's really popular. And then also you want to advertise at your portrait studio. If your seniors are going to the portrait studio to get their senior portraits taken versus taking them on campus, they want that senior picture. So chances are they want to commemorate this time in their life, which obviously who wouldn't? I mean, it's super exciting to graduate high school. And so they might want to commemorate that with a senior ad. You also have a captive audience of their parents. Typically, seniors go to their senior portraits with their parents. And so while they're getting their picture taken, they can have a flyer that the photography company can pass out to them that has all the information about how to buy their senior tribute. Okay, so still in the promotion phase. Notice we haven't even started making the yearbook yet, right? And so with that yearbook hub, you want to track everything. You want to track the coverage to ensure, like I said, the purchasers are actually in the yearbook. What a tragedy if a person purchases a yearbook, doesn't realize they're on the privacy list and they're not in it at all. Obviously, they're not going to want the yearbook, and they're probably not going to want next year because you didn't notify them and tell them this. So you want to make sure that everybody that purchased a yearbook is at least in it at least once. Typically, we want every student to be in it 3 times, which I know is a challenge, but you want to at least make sure, at the very, very least, that purchasers are in the book. Then you want to also use that list to look at the non-buyers and send reminders to them specifically and say, hey, you haven't bought your yearbook yet. You don't want that to go out to everybody because obviously some people have purchased it. So you really want to pull out those non-buyers and market them specifically. And then also you can send sticky notes that say like, hey, you're in the yearbook on page 57 to students who haven't purchased yet. So the kids who are in the book that haven't bought yet, you want to make sure that they know that they're in it. And then that is also a reminder home to make sure that they purchase their yearbook. Then I am a really big fan of sending thank you notes. You'll notice that this comes up again later in this show, but you want to send thank you notes maybe to students who have purchased. So like maybe at Halloween time, you send them a little piece of candy and they're like, you're so sweet for buying your yearbook. Or candy now, yearbook later, or something that gives them a little bit of a reward for purchasing. And so when you deliver that to them in class, the people sitting around them are like, what the heck, you got candy? I did it. I want one. And then you're like, well, buy your yearbook. And then you send it out again, like in the maybe Valentine's time, and and that will encourage more sales because who doesn't want candy? They don't want to be left out. You also need to promote specifically to your seniors. So you want to call parents of seniors who haven't purchased yet just to make sure that they know, hey, like this is available. Sometimes students don't take information home and sometimes their email is wrong on the e-marketing or whatever. And you just want to make sure that they have an opportunity and you've done everything you possibly can do to say, hey, don't forget, buy your yearbook. Because there's always going to be that parent who comes to you crying on the last day of school who realized, oh my God, I didn't buy a yearbook, and you're sold out. So you want to make sure you do the work ahead of time to try and get them to purchase before final call. And then you also want to call parents in particular. You can call everyone on the privacy list, but in particular, you want to call parents of seniors who are on the privacy list to double check that they know what they signed. A lot of times parents don't recognize that. They might have inadvertently been like, yeah, I don't want my student published anywhere, not realizing that that also includes the yearbook. And so especially for seniors, you always want to make sure you call home. If you can't get a hold of them, go to the student and have them sign off on a little agreement that says, I know that I'm on the privacy list and I will not be in the yearbook. Because then if their parent comes back to you and says, oh my gosh, why aren't they in there? We took a picture. What happened? You can be like, here's all the things I tried to call. Here's your student sign off on it. And you have the backup, the paper trail if that happens. Because that is the saddest thing. If a senior isn't in the yearbook, but it isn't on purpose, even though it is their fault, it's so sad. So, and if you can prevent that, you definitely want to. Also, another indicator is if they did take a senior picture, they're probably anticipating that it goes in the yearbook. And so if you have students who are on the privacy list but did take a picture, definitely reach out to them. And then as your final push for promotion is you have to submit a final count to the publisher. And so you want to do that obviously by the deadline. And then you want to review your budget. Like you want to make sure that you're still good to go for the plans that you had, as well as for the amount of ads you sold and that sort of thing. And then you want to create a waiting list. So typically you're going to accept orders all the way up until that final count. And then you're going to order a couple more depending on what your budget will allow and what your precedent has been and that sort of thing, because you're probably going to have a waiting list. There's inevitably going to be people that miss the deadline and they want to order. And so then that's why you create the waiting list and they can purchase at the end of the year once they get delivered. Then we finally get to production. We're 4 steps in and we haven't even started. And so this is where you're going to start to produce your yearbook. And again, like I said, this isn't linear. Honestly, things are happening alongside other things. I'm just breaking it down into sections, but all of this is happening at the same time you're promoting and at the same time you're planning, you're also producing. So during the production phase, you're going to obviously start to design things. So you're designing your cover, your end sheets, you're opening, you're closing dividers, you're writing your colophon. You are doing all of that theme related stuff to make sure that your theme is pulled all the way throughout your book and it's not just on your cover. Then you want to hold some meetings with your staff. Obviously, you're probably going to have some meetings with the entire staff, but you're also going to probably have some meetings with just your editors to kind of make some decisions and see how the production is going all the way throughout the whole process. Then for all of your spreads, this is again a very, very basic list. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into creating a spread than this list of 4 things, but the gist of it is that you're going to gather the content, put it all on the page, and then you're going to submit a rough draft to an editor, and then you submit a final draft to the advisor, and then submit this final version for proof to the publisher. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can produce spreads. You can do the rough draft, final draft, editor, advisor kind of setup. You can also have students work in groups on spreads and then submit all of it to the advisor or all of it to editors. Like there's so many different ways to break that down. And so that's one reason why there isn't an exhaustive checklist, because everybody's staff is so different. But in general, you're going to create them and then submit them. Okay, and then you have to work on the portraits. And so you need to download the file from the portrait company, and then obviously you're going to lay out your pages. You do want to typically delete some space, whether it's like a half page or a whole page or a little section for secondary coverage in your portraits. That makes your portraits really interesting to look at because it's not just those mug shots, it's like content inside there, so you get kids looking at every page, and then you got to flow them. And then you're probably going to need to edit them as well, so you might have to flow them again, but you have to start somewhere so you can start to edit them. All right, then the wonderful, wonderful group photos come up. And so you need to schedule either group photo days, or you need to just make sure and remind your groups to take group photos. Either way, there isn't really a better way. It just depends on your kind of culture at your school. If you think that groups are going to want to submit their own photos, great. If your admin will let you do a group photo day where you schedule 5 minutes for every group and you have everyone show up, whoever shows up is in the picture, then that's the way to go. But if not, then just have every group submit their own photo. I worked at a school where we had a bunch of groups and there was no way we could have orchestrated a day to do it. And so everyone submitted their own and it was fine, but the pictures weren't consistent, like design and aesthetic. So it's up to you and what you want to do, but you need to make sure that you either remind them to take their own pictures or schedule a portrait photo day. Then from each group, you also need the group roster and make sure that you have names and grade levels. You're going to have to name check them anyway for spelling, but you want to make sure that it's as accurate as possible from the sponsor of the group. And then you have to design those pages. Typically, they're just like all group photos all together, but sometimes if you're doing modular coverage, you can cover them together and put some additional content with those group photos, but you need to go and take those photos and put them in the book. Then obviously you need to also design your senior tributes. So you're going to design some templates. If your parents design them as is and then you just drop them in, that's great. But a lot of schools will make them match their theme. And so they'll take their photos and their text and they'll put their name in the theme font and make them consistent with their colors and stuff like that, which can make them look really nice and make them match the book instead of kind of just like this back section that doesn't match anything. And so that can be nice. But again, it's up to you and your comfort level. If you would rather the parents design the ads themselves and just submit them, then do that. Do whatever's easier, especially if it's your first year. Then, similar to group photos, is the sports group photos. So, typically, coaches are in charge of this. They have a photographer that they've contracted to take individual pictures and group pictures. And so, all you have to do is confirm the deadlines with the coaches and make sure that they have scheduled their photography within your deadlines and remind them to send them to you. I will emphasize that you need to remind them to send them to you because coaches are off in their coaching world and they're not thinking about yearbook unless they have a wonderful little yearbook staff member who comes and visits them every month and reminds them. It's not on their mind. And so you need to remind them that you need their team photos and you also need their rosters and you need their scoreboards. So remember, a yearbook is a historical document, and so we want to include scoreboards of all the sports teams, even JV, even freshmen, and what their records were for the year. Just a simple win or loss is totally fine. It doesn't have to be a 0 to 60, the detail in there. A win loss is totally fine. And sometimes you can find that online. A lot of times coaches have to submit this to, their UIL or whatever it is for the state. And so if you can find it online, that can make your job a little bit easier depending on when they actually submit it. But with coaches in particular, in my experience at least, you're going to have to remind them a ton. And so put it on your calendar, put it on your to-do list to remind them, and remind your students to remind them. And then sometimes, especially if you have a spring delivery, you might also have a supplement. And so again, this is a super basic overview of checklist. Like you're going to set your deadlines for it, you're going to create it, you're going to submit it, and then you're going to proof it. There's not much else to be said that's different from producing spreads for a supplement, but you just need to make sure that you meet those deadlines because those are usually really quick turnarounds, and you don't want to miss that because it'll affect your distribution date. And then it's the end of the school year, like you don't want to push it back too far, and then it's into the summer, and that's just a mess. So the deadline for your supplement is super, super important. Then you want to implement systems for accountability. And this is part of the planning and part of the produce section. Produce? Not vegetables. Produce section. And you want to make sure that you're creating systems that keep your students accountable. Every year, there's a kid in the yearbook who is quoted, and then that kid reads their quote and there's like, I never said that. You want to make sure that your students are keeping records of every interview that they put in the book. One, to show that it was legitimate, and also that it was verbatim. And so if something is said or quoted incorrectly, that's either on the student who said it or that's on your student who typed it incorrectly. And so a lot of times it's just a Google Drive where they can drop recordings or they can drop screenshots of a text message. But you want to make sure you have some sort of system for accountability for if and when it happens that a student is really mad about a quote that they feel is misquoted, then you have proof that it wasn't. It also teaches your students appropriate journalistic integrity and stuff like that, of course. All right, so then you produce your book, right? And now we need to proof it and make sure that everything is how we want it to be when it's printed and delivered to us. So a couple of things that you need to proof. One of them being your cover. Review it carefully. They're going to send you a hardcover copy of your cover that you get to see and make sure that it's all the proper treatments and stuff. You want to make sure you give timely feedback on that for edits because cover changes do take a lot of time and they can be costly if something is really wrong. So you want to make sure you give really feedback really fast or approve it. Then you also want to proof your portraits. The easiest way to do this is to print them all out and hang them up the pages on a poster board or something in a common area like the cafeteria for students to review themselves. This makes it a lot easier. You're obviously going to go through and check that the students' names are spelled right, but sometimes you'll have students that their heads, their portraits are swapped with their names. And unless you know every student in your school, you're not going to know that. And so if you hang it up in a common area, you can also PDF it and send it to teachers to review. You get that job done in mass, like in bulk, and you don't have to worry about it being on you also because you did give people an opportunity to review it. So leave it up for about a week and also have a method for them to submit changes. So maybe have some forms there they can turn into you or a Google form, the QR code they can scan where they can request changes or edits or anything that might be really, really wrong. This is also where you'll probably catch a lot of those preferred name change requests. And so make sure you have a policy for that before you hang these up. And then also your spreads. So you're going to get proofs back, whether they're paper proofs or they're virtual proofs or digital proofs. You want to make sure you review those in a timely manner and get them back to the plant in about 3 days. The reason is because your whole book is on hold until they get those proofs back. And so what they do is as soon as you approve them, they go ahead and print those signatures. And so they are waiting on you to approve them in order to get those signatures printed. And the more you delay on those, your whole book could be delayed by that. And so that's really important part of the process about the printing production. If you haven't watched or you haven't visited the plant, there are videos online that you can view of like the plant tour, and they explain how the print process works and how they print signatures, and then they collate them and they store them until you have your whole book done, and then they build the book and put it all together. And that is super important, but because we don't see it on our end as advisors and students, it's hard to grasp why that's really important. You're like, oh, what's another couple of days? But it really is important that you get your proofs back in a timely manner. And then if there's something egregious, there's something huge, a big issue, or there's going to be a major delay, or you have COVID and you can't get the proofs back, contact your rep as early as possible. They can work some magic in the plant. They can put alerts on your account so they know when to expect the proofs, but you definitely want to communicate early and often with your rep if there's any issues at all. That's what they're there for. They're there to help you, and they can, again, work some magic if they need to within reason, but if they didn't know about it, then they can't do anything about it. Okay, and then sometimes, and not always, you want to send your senior tributes also to be proofed by the parents. It does kind of open a can of worms because if you let parents proof it, it opens the floor up for them to be like, well, I don't like this, or I don't like this color, or I don't want this different size, or switch these photos. And so it's up to you and your staff's bandwidth, and if you want to send proofs to parents. I think it's a good courtesy because these are expensive advertisements or tributes that they're spending money on, and it's their senior year, it's their senior yearbook, and it would be really unfortunate to leave someone out or to switch someone's name or to have something incorrect. And so if you have the time and the bandwidth to do it, I definitely recommend it. But I also just know that like you don't have to. And if it's stressing you out to do that, then it's not worth it. But that should be a goal. Like if you can work towards that, that's a good thing to do for parents. Okay, now you have your book completed and you are ready to present it to the world. Distribution, baby. So there's a lot to do when it comes to distribution. The very first thing is you want to inspect and count your books. Especially if you have a lot of books, that can be quite a task because yearbook boxes are very heavy. But you want to make sure that you have the right amount and that you inspect them. That sometimes print errors happen. Sometimes books get printed upside down, pages get stuck and they get stuck together or they get torn. And so you can't give those to students. And so you want to inspect them and then report any of those issues to your publisher, to your rep, and they will help you get that taken care of. Typically, there'll be a couple of copies that are overrun because they always print a couple of extra just in case that happens. So hopefully those can make up for those issues if there are any. But anything that's major, will definitely push back your distribution date if, like, say you had to get something reprinted. So you definitely want to make sure that you inspect them before you start handing them out. Then you want to pull copies, obviously, for your own classroom, for your administrator. Typically, it's just the building principal. Not every administrator in the building gets a free copy, and then the library as well. The publisher typically does include a library copy for free, but I always pull one for my own classroom, and then I usually give one to the principal. Also, if you can get the principal to take a picture for social media and be like, "Oh my gosh, so excited, I got my yearbook," that can be really good to help you promote distribution. Then it's always a good idea to include a disclaimer flyer into the front cover of each book that just explains that this is a student publication. There are bound to be mistakes. We regret them. We're so sorry. If you'd like to make us aware of it, please fill out this form, or here's where you go, or here's where you don't go. And then also talk about how once you write in your book, it is yours. If you didn't inspect it beforehand and you realize that all the pages are upside down, but you already wrote your name in it, we unfortunately can't refund your book. And that just puts that out there in the very beginning without having to explain that 100 times when kids come and start to ask you for a swap or for a refund, because we're not doing that. Then you need to print your distribution list. You can download this from your publisher. I usually put this into Excel and add a field, like a blank cell for them to sign for it. Sometimes because your books are fun to look at and they're popular. You'll have a kid that, says that their name is blah, 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 and they want to pick up their yearbook. You want to make sure that they also pick up their yearbooks with their ID. A picture of it on their phone is fine, but you don't want to just give out yearbooks because John Smith says that he's John Smith. Even if he's your student and that's who he is, make it so everybody has to show your ID so you're not playing favorites or anything. But you want to have them sign for it because you don't want someone to say that they picked up their yearbook and they didn't, or they get someone else's or that sort of thing. Even distributing yearbooks to siblings isn't always a good idea because, if you are distributing during lunch, for instance, and some sibling has A lunch and then sibling B has B lunch and they try to go pick up their book, but their sibling picked it up, everyone needs to pick up their own yearbook if possible. And then you need to have a plan for, kids that might have dropped out or are withdrawn from the school, or they went to a different school, or they moved away, or they're foreign exchange students, depending on when your books are delivered. If you're a fall delivery or a summer delivery, your foreign exchange students have already gone home. And so how do you get them their copies of their book? And then I always go through a rehearsal with my students about distribution and role play through some scenarios. You have a really angry parent, you have a really angry student, you have a torn book. What do you do? What issues can they resolve versus what issues need to come to me as the advisor, and walk them through and kind of role play those scenarios. Because when you're distributing your books, especially if you have a ton of your books to distribute, it can be really chaotic and crazy. And you want them to be well prepared and make sure that they know what to do in all cases, all situations. And then obviously if you're having some sort of event, you want to request tables and chairs and plan everything. Sometimes you can decorate and put balloons up and all of that sort of stuff, make it really fun. But you just want to plan the event of yearbook distribution. And that might just be delivering them to English classes or electives or advisories, whatever it may be. You want to plan that event out. Also, in order to get to the event, you have to organize all the personalized books or the nameplates and the accessories and make sure that they're matched with the proper maybe alpha split if you have them picking up at different tables. You want to gather supplies like pens, highlighters, the walkie-talkies if you're at multiple parts of the campus. We had a freshman center and then the main campus. And so I had a walkie-talkie with my students that were at the other end because it was literally a mile away. And so that was just the easiest way to handle that. You also want to double check the testing schedule. So you don't want to be too close to AP tests or final exams or any other big tests that your whole school is participating in. And then also, I wouldn't have put this on here if it didn't actually happen to me, but double check the fire drill schedule. We were distributing yearbooks one year during lunches, and we had 4 lunches. So they literally were from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. all day long. And we also had a ton of yearbooks that we were distributing. And it's a lot of money that are on those tables, and lo and behold, during the middle of the planning period, right before lunch started, there was a fire drill that was planned, knowing that it was during yearbook distribution. So we have hundreds of yearbooks on tables, and I have all my kids guarding them with their life, covering them with their bodies, while all the thousands of kids in our school are rushing out because of the fire drill. And it was just a mess. And I was almost in tears because I was why would you do this? Why would you do this on yearbook distribution day of all days? So double check with your front office or whoever's in charge of fire drills and make sure that it is not scheduled for the same day as yearbook distribution, because that's silly, is what I'll say about that. Then you want to create a sales kit if you have a waiting list or you have extra copies that you're going to sell. I always sell the extra copies that they didn't pre-order for a little bit higher price. And typically, if you have a lot of high demand, you can sell them for $100 or $125 each, because that also teaches them to pre-order next year. And so you want to have a kit for that. So you want to make sure that whoever's accepting those cash sales have a lockbox or a receipt book, and they have whatever they need to be able to accept cash for those yearbooks. And then, like we said, you want to have your students sign once they receive their book. But as much planning you can do, and you did all these proper steps and you planned new preps, you're going to also need to anticipate issues. There's typically always some sort of issue with yearbook distribution. So you need to know what the policy is for refunds. Do you offer refunds? Typically, we don't offer refunds for yearbooks unless there's some really crazy error. And you want to make sure your principal knows this, because a lot of times principals are yeah, sure, we'll get you a refund, not knowing that you can't do that. Especially for somebody who's just not happy with the design, you can't offer a refund on a commemorative item like that. And if you did, you'd have to do it across the board, and then anybody could request a refund, and then you're in debt. that can't be the standard. But then you also need a policy for corrections. Regrettably, sometimes big errors do happen. Sometimes a senior's name will be wrong, or anybody's name will be wrong. There'll be a legitimate misquote or whatever it is. And so you can print crack and peel stickers that you can use to cover up pages in the yearbook. And you just need to have a policy for when that is appropriate, how many you order, what the turnaround time is, so you can tell parents or whoever it is that's questioning the situation, so you can have an answer ready. You also want to create a procedure for how students can report issues. So and parents, how do they do that? Do they call you? Do they email you? Typically, you're going to be out distributing yearbooks the day of, and so your phone might be ringing off the hook in your classroom, and so you want to have a message on your voicemail that says, like, here's how you email me, or I'll get back to you tomorrow, or whatever. And then you also want to have an out-of-office message on your email inbox, maybe for the whole week, that talks about yearbook distribution and when they can expect a response from you and how to deal with issues and that sort of thing. Because if you have 50 parents call you, you're not going to be able to get back to them all in one day. So you want to kind of manage their expectations and give them that information ahead of time. All right, and then the very last step is finally time to party. So the first part of this last phase is that you need to breathe. The hard part of the yearbook production is over. Even the distribution is over. You have a well-deserved couple of weeks where you can just breathe and do nothing. Just enjoy the fact that it's done. But you also want to plan some sort of celebration for your staff. We typically did a banquet, and that sounds fancy, but it can literally be like an end of the year party where you go play laser tag. Like, it doesn't have to be fancy. Review your budget and secure some sort of activity or venue. We liked doing it as a banquet because we got really dressed up. People wore their prom outfits again, so they got like 2 uses out of it. We would take really fancy photos and a big group photo. We would make it like an event. Like, I was the MC, and it's just really, really fun. And then you want to send invitations, because even if it's really casual, make it a bigger deal and send them an actual printed invitation. If you're doing some sort of thing like where you need to have a script, I always did, so I would not make sure I didn't miss anything. And I always had like my seniors, like the colleges they were going to, like my memory is just so terrible, like I would never remember all of that. So I put that all into a script. We would collect award nominations, and so you want to do serious ones and silly ones. So serious ones would be like editor of the year, photographer of the year, spread of the year, story of the year, photo of the year, all that kind of stuff, as well as silly things like most likely to forget your memory card, most likely to fall asleep under the desk, and I always let my students submit on a Google form, who deserves what award, and then for each person they also create an award for them, and then you decide what they are, and then with your editors create them, just print them out on design certificates. You can do it in Canva and then print them out. Then we always use the banquet or the end of year event to induct the new Quill and Scroll members and have them take the oath. It's the script of it is online. It's super easy. I would just include that in your script. And then we would always celebrate any awards or recognitions or critiques that we received for the publications last year. And then also, of course, honor our seniors. I would always talk about their years of service, their leadership positions, as well as where they're going to college or their future plans. And then we would pass the torch to the new editors. So literally our publication was called The Torch. And so we would pass the torch, that was our school newspaper, to the new editors. And it was just kind of funny. But you could also do it with a candle ceremony or something funny, like any sort of traditions. We always had a photo booth at ours. That was a very important tradition. We also had a donut wall, lots of different fun things that you can make this event really special for your staff. I went backwards. And then at the very, very, very end of the year, you want to make sure that your staff sends thank you notes. So as part of my assignments that I would give my seniors who literally have nothing better to do, I would have them write thank you notes. So we would write thank you notes to our sales rep, to our account executive at the plant, to all the administrators, all the staff parents, like all of your own staff's parents, because they're the ones driving to and from games if the kid doesn't drive yet, or they're, spending time away from their family, and so we want to thank their parents. Also, sometimes the school board, like depending if they're involved in anything that you've done throughout the year, it's just nice to send them a thank you note. And I will tell you that it is very impressive for a school board to receive a thank you note from students, because that's very, very rare. And then also any adults in the building who have helped you, if they have sent something to you, if they have submitted something, even if it's their job, thank them. Thank the athletic coaches, the fine arts directors, the department chairs, as well as any local businesses that might advertise in your book. Sometimes schools only do senior tributes, and that's totally fine. But if you do allow local businesses to advertise, make sure you send them a thank you note. Almost guaranteed they will advertise again if you send them a thank you note, because again, it's very rare and it's cool to see that from students. All right, so you have made it through all your phases. You have prepared, you have planned, you have promoted, you have produced, you have proofed, you have presented, and then you partied. You made it through the year. I hope that this was helpful. If you have any questions at all, please reach out. My email is just Katie, Katie, at organizedadvisor with an ER.com. You can also go to organizedadvisor.com and click on contact. The form goes straight to my inbox, and I'm happy to help throughout your year. But I am so excited to see your yearbooks. If you have any questions at all, please reach out. Otherwise, I'll see you around. Talk to you soon. Bye.